So today is another installment of my on-again, off-again sermon series called Lies My Pastor Told Me, Doubting Thomas. So many of you who grew up in a Christian church have probably heard a sermon about this text that goes along this sort of a line. It basically boils down to Thomas doubted, doubting bad. Don't doubt and be a doubting Thomas, right? Something along that line. Don't question, don't doubt, just have faith. Like the apostles, not Thomas. Okay, so this doesn't actually hold up as an interpretation when you have it stand up against the actual story in the Bible. Like, that interpretation doesn't work really well. And let me walk you through why it doesn't. Okay, so at this point, we're a week, at the beginning of the story, we were 1 week after, presumably, the resurrection, because they say a week later, and that's what they were just talking about, okay? So we're about a week after the resurrection. Some people might say a week after Good Friday. Okay, fine, we can debate on the 24 hours. It doesn't matter so much. So a week later, you are there, they're hiding in Jerusalem, above someone's garage, basically. Why? Because they fear what the Jews did to Jesus might be done to them. They fear being killed. Now, it's worth noting what that means is all these predictions Jesus made have come true, right? He was crucified, he died, they've heard from the women about the resurrection, they may or may not, at some level, depending on which gospel you're reading, more or less believe the women, but mostly don't. But they had been told, both by Jesus and then the angels that are met, that they should go forward to Galilee to meet Jesus, right? You heard that last week on Easter. Why are you here? Why are you looking for the living among the dead? He said, go forward to Galilee. You know where they are? Not Galilee. They're in Jerusalem still. They haven't moved. Even though all these predictions have come true, even that everything Jesus has said has happened, they're hiding in Jerusalem of all places. They don't have enough faith to get out and walk to where Jesus told them to go. And so because Jesus loves them, instead of waiting for them in Galilee, he shows up. And he says, guys, seriously, hands, side. No, unfortunately, Thomas isn't there for whatever reason. I mean, I like the idea that he was going and getting lox and a bagel. That seems good to me because I love that. That's one of my favorite meals ever, okay, that our kiddos brought up at children's time here. But Thomas isn't there. He comes back, and they're like, dude, we saw the Lord. It's worth noting, if they really believed that they'd seen the Lord, they would have gotten up and gone to Galilee, which they still haven't done, and they still haven't done it a week later, right? Because Jesus comes back 1 week later, and that's when he runs into Thomas and sort of scolds everybody. Now, by taking and saying he's scolding Thomas isn't really fair, because this is like when your mother is like, all right, folks, I'm looking at all the kids, whoever messed up the whatever room, let's go with bathroom, should probably clean it up. Now, she ain't talking directly to whoever she's looking at. She's talking to all y'all, right? Yes. It's the same sort of thing when Jesus is like, well, those who could believe without seeing, they are truly blessed, you yahoos, who have now seen me twice in most of y'all's cases and still haven't made it to Galilee. And by the way, they never will. Now, sometimes when I do these, like, lies my pastor told me, they're just sort of like inaccuracies. This one, though, I think goes beyond inaccuracy into bad advice. It isn't just that, like, I don't think it's a reasonable interpretation to go beat up poor Thomas. I think there's a bad advice in this. And as you all know, I think that Christianity was going along and that come the 1960s, we break from our tradition in a number of ways, sometimes good, sometimes bad. And I think this is one of the places we did a bad job when we broke in the 60s from our tradition. Because our tradition up to that point had been this idea that the center of your spiritual life is you and Jesus, and a relationship between you and Jesus, right? And then what starts happening in the 60s is a lot of mainline pastors using this and a few other texts start to drift from this center of you and Jesus being the center of it, and then everything built out from that, right? To this idea that theologians or pastors are experts on Jesus, so you have a relationship with Jesus through them, right? I mean, how many times have you come up with something where you felt spiritually moved, and you go to the pastor, you go to the theologian, you go to the learned person, and they go, well, that's not how Jesus works. That's not good, right? I know it's hard to get brain around, so let's pull it into a different relational category for a moment. Think about someone you have a deep relationship with. It could be a spouse, it could be a best friend, it could be a child, it could be a sibling. Just some sort of loving and deep and meaningful relationship. Think about that. Y'all got someone in mind? Everyone? Everyone? Good? Okay. You're getting nods, so I'm going to go with that. So you got that person in mind. Now, if I was to say never question that person, never ask them a question, never have a doubt, that would be really unhealthy, right? If you never asked your spouse how their day was going, or why did they say that, or why did they look at you that way, or why am I in trouble, you're gonna not have a good relationship, right? Because you need to elicit that feedback. In fact, the only way you would have a relationship with someone where you never asked them would be if the relationship was dead, right? Like if you never are curious what your spouse is thinking, there's a problem. If you're never curious about what your spouse is feeling, there's a problem. And what happens if you interpret this as don't question, don't be curious, don't ask God questions, is what they're really saying is don't be curious, don't ask your pastor questions. And they're inserting the pastor or the theologian between you and Jesus. And that's even more unhealthy. Think about it again. Take that same relationship. Let's say you had a question. One horribly bad idea would be you go to your best friend who goes to your spouse and asks your spouse what they're thinking to tell the best friend to tell you, right? Like that's a horrible idea. That's like middle school logic. And that's mean to middle schoolers, right? That wouldn't work. And so I think going down this line of like you're just to obey and not question and not ask has dampened a lot of people's spiritual lives. Because you absolutely should go to Christ and absolutely question Christ and absolutely show up as the full person you are with questions and doubts and angers and regrets and joys and happiness and whatever else is inside of you. Bring that to Christ. Now, you might be asking, then why do I need a pastor? Why do we need theologians? For the same reason that you have therapists. Because sometimes you take all of yourself, you show up fully in a relationship, and you don't get the expected result you thought. Or you get incredibly confused. And you're still walking away going, okay, we've had an hour and a half long conversation. I don't know why I'm in trouble. Right? That's when bringing someone else in to hear everyone talk can be helpful. But they don't talk for your spouse, right? A good therapist doesn't say, well, what your wife is actually saying is blah, blah, blah. They have your wife there, or your spouse there, or your friend there, right? It's the same thing. I think it's dangerous to go down the road of not questioning, not doubting, because the reality is we're humans. We always question. We always doubt. The reality is we don't just hold on to that and say nothing. We take it to Jesus. And we try to be fully present to him. And if you still struggle, then yeah, that's why we have all these other people. That's why we have trusted Christians, why we have Christian communities, why we have pastors, that's why we have theologians. For when that doesn't seem to be working, when you can't hear what God is saying in response, that's when you go. But you never let us get in between you and God, no more than you should let your best friend get between you and your spouse. See, when it comes to the relationship you have with Christ, what I think this is reminding us of is a completely different thing. It's not a screaming, don't doubt, don't question. No, it's not that at all. It's saying absolutely doubt, absolutely question, just like the apostles did. Take your questions and your doubts and take them to Jesus just like they did. Entire book of Job wouldn't happen if he had just taken his issues to Jesus. It's because he took it to all his friends at the bar that he had such a bad day. Don't believe me, read the book of Job. See, the promise out of this isn't telling us what we should do as much as telling us what God is doing. See, even when we don't listen, even when we don't see, even when he has told us 1,000 times what to do and we still have not gotten around to doing it, you know what? Jesus still shows up. And you can lock the door and hide away, and Jesus still shows up. You can't hide from him. You can't get away from him. There's no power on this earth, in the past, in the future, on heaven or in hell, or on this planet itself that can separate you from the love of God. Jesus always shows up fully, every moment of every day for you. That's never in question. What's in question is, do you have the courage? Do you have the strength? Do you have the fortitude to show up to him? Do you have the courage of Thomas and the courage of the apostles to say, I'm still not getting it. Can I see the holes in your hand? And know that Jesus will say in response to even the hardest questions, even the most dumb, ridiculous questions, he'll respond as he did to his apostles and say, peace be with you. Because he loves you. He cares for you and is always there. So as you go out this week, ask yourself a question. In that prayer life or meditative life or whatever it is for you, when you are standing there with Christ, are you fully present? Because he is.